Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Brigadier General Amir Avivi. He's the founder of Protectors of Israel. Amir, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Tell our viewers a little bit about what is the Protectors of Israel organization.
Well, our organization was founded to do one major thing, to ensure that Israel will be secure and survive and will thrive for generations to come.
The makeup of your organization, what makes it so unique. Can you tell us about who's in the organization? Who are the members?
Well, since we founded the organization in February, 1,200 high-ranking officers, commanders, and warriors joined the organization.
And you've had a very powerful message about security for Israel, specifically on the issue of sovereignty. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, we think that in order for Israel to thrive, to be secure forever, we don't know what will happen in the future. Israel must apply sovereignty in the Jordan Valley. There is no security without towns. It must apply sovereignty over the Jewish towns in Judea and Samaria in order to enable the army to operate freely and make Israel secure.
You hear a lot about left-wing generals in Israel saying we need to give up land, we have to divide the country, it's the only way. Why is there that sentiment that the top generals, the top brass in Israel, are usually on the left?
Well, I think that their top value is not security, it's peace agreements. They believe that if you sign a paper, this will make Israel secure. We think that Israel must be able to defend itself by itself. We know that peace agreements might work for a certain time, and then they might not. So we want to draw clear lines. What are the security needs for the state of Israel in the long term? Not what will happen in the 5-10 years from now, but generations from now.
What we've seen with the Abrahamic Accords, the peace agreements with the United Arab Emirates and then with Bahrain and other countries to follow, is that in fact, peace only comes if you're strong. It's peace through strength, isn't it? So those generals who are saying that peace agreements are the most important thing, they were wrong about giving away the land.
Yeah, you are right. Peace will come only when the Arab states will understand they cannot defeat Israel. Once they see a powerful state, talking about the army, talking about economy, talking about high-tech, then they have the incentive to be in touch with Israel and do business, make peace.
We see a lot in the international media that they talk about left-wing generals saying that, you know, the Iran agreement is a good thing, that we need to give up land. It seems to always be against the government's point of view. Yet your organization, 1,200 officers, is standing with the government of Israel. Why isn't there more media attention about what you're doing?
Well, the media, unfortunately, in Israel is very supportive of the idea of a Palestinian state. And for that, they are willing to support withdrawal of critical areas in Israel. So we don't get a lot of media attention, but what we do is educate the young generation, prepare the next generation to understand what are the national security needs of the state of Israel.
You've met recently with our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to discuss sovereignty, and that as a military issue, this is very important to the state of Israel. What was the response of the government of Israel? Why haven't we declared sovereignty yet?
Well, I think that the government is under a lot of pressure. The Prime Minister understands the importance of sovereignty, yet is not willing to apply it without American consent. He feels that he needs to be sure that in the future we won't be attacked in the UN in a way that might impose sanctions on Israel. So he is waiting for the President Trump to give him the green light to apply sovereignty, and this didn't happen yet.
We see that with the Abrahamic Accords. A lot of people are saying that the price for the peace with United Arab Emirates and Bahrain was giving up on sovereignty. Do you think it's either Abrahamic Accords or sovereignty, or is there a chance that we could get both?
I think we can get both. I don't think that the government gave up on sovereignty, and it was said clearly, we are postponing it. It's on suspension. But having sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley is a far, far bigger interest talking about long-term security than any peace accord in the Middle East. I want to remind you that we had peace with Iran. We had a very good peace with Turkey. And the things change. You know, you sign peace agreements and then things change. Israel's security is an eternal value. This is the first thing we have to make sure happens.
You know, people talk about sovereignty as some sort of land grab, but really it's not moving populations, it's just declaring civilian law instead of military law. So why is it so hard to do something like that? Shouldn't it be just an internal government decision? Why does anyone even care?
Yeah, it should be. But unfortunately, the people in Israel and also abroad are told many lies. They are told that if we apply sovereignty, it's about applying the Israeli law in Israeli population. If we do that, supposedly we are annexing 2 million Palestinians. This is a lie. The Palestinian Authority will remain as it is. They will continue to have their own lives and their own government. We are talking about applying the Israeli law in Israeli towns. There is no reason whatsoever to have Israeli citizens under military law and not under the Israeli law.
This brings up a bigger question. A Palestinian state in the areas of Judea and Samaria, isn't that a security concern?
Of course it is. If you talk about a Palestinian state that is fully sovereign and has an army and they can go in and out freely without any inspection and they can bring in anybody they want, this is setting the terms for the destruction of the state of Israel. Israel cannot thrive in a scenario like that. This is why Trump's plan is saying what we think is true and should be done. Having a state like San Marino, having a state like Luxembourg, and not a state like some of the generals in the left in Israel want. So you can have the term state, but it must be without military, it must be with full security responsibility of the state of Israel.
We're seeing peace coming around the Middle East with the moderate countries in the Arab world, in Africa as well. But at the same time, Iran is still pumping weapons into Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. How big of a threat is Iran today?
Iran is a huge threat for two reasons. One is the nuclear bombs they are trying to produce. They will be able to do so in a few months. They will be able to start producing their first nuclear bombs. And we have to address that. The state of Israel and the United States have to understand that time is ticking and a decision has to be taken. And we have to be ready to remove this threat even by a military attack or any other way. We cannot live with such a threat. The other thing is that they want to control the whole Middle East. So they are arming different organizations like Hezbollah, Yemen, and so on. And this needs to be stopped. Iran is the main generator of terror in the Middle East.
Amir, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, I think that people have to understand there is nothing more important for the Jewish people, especially talking about the fact that we were thrown twice from our land. For 2,000 years we were persecuted. Now we are back. And we are dealing with one main issue: how to secure the state of Israel for generations to come and make sure that never again, the Jewish people will be under the threat of extinction.
Thank you, Amir, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.